I've been in the Senate for 8 years. In dog years, that's 56 years. And it feels like 56 years. I've learned a lot, met a lot of interesting people. Before I got here, everybody told me about the Washington bubble. And I said, how serious could they be? Well, it's true. There is a Washington bubble. This place is different. It's in its own way, sometimes disappointing, sometimes refreshing. It is deeply weird. For one thing, common sense is illegal in Washington. It's illegal. For another thing, I've discovered that this is a town of very frustrated ex-class presidents. And there's a Washington way of doing things. And when things aren't done that way, when somebody challenges the status quo, many, not all, but many of these frustrated ex-class presidents in Washington, on the Hill and otherwise, they get excited, not in a good way. They can't get their mind around doing anything other than the Washington way. Some of them, particularly in the media, they go almost catatonic, or the exact opposite. They foam at the mouth. And they really get upset. They can make a Valium nervous. It's like the world, we're not doing things the way we've always done them, and the world's going to spin off its axis. I want to try to put in perspective what many of my Democratic friends have been talking about today. They're very, very, very upset at President Trump. And they're very, very, very upset at Elon Musk. President Trump ran for president on a number of issues. One of the issues he ran on, he said it almost every day. He said, if you elect me president, I'm going to go through the entire budget and review all the spending, line by line. If I heard him say that once, I heard him say it 1,000 times. And that's what he's been doing. He went out and appointed, through an executive order, Elon Musk, who some people like him, some don't, but he's not a dummy. He's a very successful business person. He's got a top secret security clearance. President Trump issued an executive order, and he turned to Mr. Musk, and he said, Mr. Musk, I want you to do for me what I said I was going to do in the election. I want you to go through all the spending, line by line. Now, let me ask you something, Mr. President. How are you going to review the spending without reviewing the spending? How are you going to audit the spending by an agency without auditing the agency? That's what I mean when I say common sense is illegal in Washington, D.C. That's what Mr. Musk is doing. He's put together a crackerjack team, and they're going through everybody's spending line by line, item by item. And my Democratic colleagues are very, very, very upset. And they've been very eloquent. They've talked about the process, and President Trump's executive order supposedly violates the Constitution. And they They've accused Mr. Musk of having conflicts of interest, and I've heard people say he's sitting over there with a notepad copying down everybody's Social Security number and he's going to go use it to make money. I mean, people in this town, not just my Democratic colleagues, they're really upset. They've never had anybody question their spending. But that's what Mr. Musk is doing. But you know, I've listened. This has been going on for a week. People have been screaming like they're part of a prison riot. Oh my God, look at what Musk is doing. He's looking at the spending. And I've listened to people talk about the process and debate whether it's constitutional and discuss how many lawyers can dance on the head of a pin. But you know what? I haven't heard one single person who's upset with President Trump or Mr. Musk talk about what he's found. They don't want to talk about the spending porn, the waste of taxpayer money that he's found. I mean, that's the point of all this. I tell you who is interested: the American people. The people in America who get up every day and go to work and obey the law and pay their taxes and try to educate their kids and try to do the right thing by their kids and try to save a little money for retirement, and have had to live through 20% inflation under President Biden. They understand what Musk is doing. They understand spending porn and wasting taxpayer money. Now, Mr. Musk started with the USAID. That handles a lot of foreign aid for America. American people are very generous. In our country, you know, when you're homeless, we'll house you. When you're hungry, we'll feed you. In our country, when you're too poor to be sick, we'll pay for your doctor. And we send a lot of money overseas to help our world's neighbors. And the USAID is in charge, in large part, of that. But I'll tell you what Mr. Musk discovered. I find it fascinating. He discovered that the American taxpayers are giving money to Afghanistan. He found that we are giving money to Yemen. He found that we are giving money to Syria. I didn't know that. Some of our foreign aid is going to Yemen, Afghanistan, Syria. He found that the USAID has 10,000 people. 10,000 people, employees. And every year they give away $40 billion. Mr. Musk also found, and I'm not saying that all of this money is wasteful. I'm not. Some of this money, I'm sure, does some good. That's why Secretary Rubio is going to revamp the department to separate the good from the bad. But this is the kind of stuff Mr. Musk found. He found that the USAID gave money to support electric vehicles in Vietnam. Our money, taxpayer money. He found that USAID gave money to a transgender clinic in India. I didn't know that. I bet you the American people didn't know that. He found that the USAID gave $1.5 million to a Serbian LGBTQ group called Grupa Izladaji. I probably mispronounced that, my apologies. Anyway, they got $1.5 million to, quote, advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in Serbia's workplaces and business communities. What else did Mr. Musk found that my colleagues don't want to talk about? Well, he reviewed a study and then went and checked it. The study was done by the Middle East Forum. They found that USAID spent $164 million to support radical organizations around the world. We're not talking Cub Scout troops here. We're talking about radical organizations around the world. They gave $122 million of that to groups aligned with foreign terrorist organizations. Our taxpayer money. According to this report and Mr. Musk, the USAID has given millions of dollars to, quote, organizations in Gaza controlled by Hamas. Why aren't my colleagues talking about that? Recipients of the money, they found, have, quote, called for their lands to be cleansed from the impurity of Jews. That's who we're giving foreign aid to. What else? I'm not going to spend my whole time talking about this, but nobody else is talking about it. They're just talking about the process and Mr. Musk, and he's a mean guy, and he shouldn't be looking at our spending. Well, he is. And I kind of find what he's found out interesting. He found that we gave $2 million, USAID did, for sex changes in Guatemala. He found that we gave $20 million to produce a new Sesame Street show in Iraq. He found that we gave $4.5 million of taxpayer money to combat disinformation in Kazakhstan. He found that we gave $10 million, USAID did, of meals to an al-Qaeda-linked terrorist group called the Nusra Front. Mr. Musk found that we gave $7.9 million of taxpayer money to a project that would teach Sri Lankan journalists to avoid binary gendered language. The USAID took $8 million and gave it to a bunch of journalists in Sri Lanka to teach them how to avoid binary gendered language. I don't know what the hell binary gendered language is. I think I do. You think most taxpayers would support that? Why aren't we talking about that? The USAID gave $1.5 million to promote LGBT advocacy in Jamaica. They gave $1.5 million to rebuild the Cuban media ecosystem. They gave $1.5 million for, quote, art for inclusion of people with disabilities in Belarus. Another $3.9 million for LGBT causes in Macedonia. $8.3 million for equity and inclusion education in Nepal. I could go all night. And many of my colleagues are upset. They're really mad at Mr. Musk. Hell, I think we ought to give him a medal. All he's doing is what President Trump said he was going to do. President Trump said he's going to audit the spending. So Trump goes and hires Musk, again with the top secret security clearance. Nobody can quibble with his intelligence. You know, the guy's as smart as Einstein's cousin. He's a very successful businessman. Some say he's the richest guy in the world. And he's doing the auditing. And man, he's finding a lot of stuff. I call it spending porn. Now, I'm not saying everything that USAID does is wasted. But I'm saying a lot of it is. A hell of a lot of it is. And we ought to be on the floor of this United States Senate thanking Mr. Musk. And we ought to be asking him to go through every agency and look at everybody's budget. Everybody's budget. That's what the American people want. They don't want to talk about process. They don't want to continue with the Washington way. They want to save some money. Now, let me tell you what's really going on here, too, Mr. President. For 4 years under President Biden, and for 8 years under President Obama, and I respect both of them. I don't hate anybody. I don't. When I say my prayers at night, one of the things I ask God, God, don't let me hate, because it's hard in Washington. Don't let me hate. I have all the respect in the world for President Biden and President Obama. Tough job. But between them, they spent 12 years in Washington, and presidents set the tone. They control the questions that are asked. And here's the question that President Obama and President Biden asked for 8 years. I heard it for 12 years. I heard it every single day. Who needs to pay more in taxes? Is it you? Is it you? Who needs to pay more in taxes? We need more money. Who needs to pony up more? That was the issue. But that's not the issue today. We have a new president. You know what the issue is today? What the hell happened to all the money? What the hell happened to all the money? And that's what Mr. Musk is finding out. That's all this is about. And I'm just shocked that my colleagues have decided that this is a hill they're going to die on. How can you look the American people in the eye and support this kind of waste? Support this kind of spending porn? I mean, the election to me made at least one thing clear, that the American people are sick and tired of people in Washington denying reality. The last administration tried to convince us that we were living in a crime-free world where inflation was temporary and the border was secure. And the American people didn't buy it. You know why? Because it wasn't true. And the administration, our last administration, tried to argue that Bidenomics was making our lives better. But the American people knew differently.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Nice meeting you here. Come here often?
X, are you okay? This is X, and he's a great guy, high IQ. He's a high IQ individual.
Yeah, he's got this. Check out this cool chain he's got.
So thank you very much. We had a busy day today. The king just left, and we've had a great discussion, terrific discussion concerning Gaza and everything else. We had discussions also about Saturday at 12 o'clock. It's going to be a big moment. We'll see what happens. I don't expect much happening with these people, but we'll see what happens. And we're going to be signing a very important deal today. It's DOGE, and I'm going to ask Elon to tell you a little bit about it and some of the things that we found, which are shocking. Billions and billions of dollars in waste, fraud, and abuse. And I think it's very important. And that's one of the reasons I got elected. I said, we're going to do that. Nobody had any idea it was that bad, that sick, and that corrupt. And it seems hard to believe that judges want to try and stop us from looking for corruption, especially when we found hundreds of millions of dollars worth, much more than that, in just a short period of time. And we want to weed out the corruption. And it seems hard to believe that a judge could say, we don't want you to do that. Well, so maybe we have to look at the judges, because that's a very serious, I think it's a very serious violation. I'll ask Elon Musk to say a few words, and we'll take some questions. Elon, go ahead.
Sure. So at a high level, you say, what is the goal of DOGE, and I think a significant part of this of presidency is to restore democracy. This may seem like, well, aren't we in a democracy? Well, if you don't have a feedback loop, okay, we'd have to, if you sorry. Tell you, gravitas can be difficult sometimes. If if there's not a good feedback loop from the people to the government, and if you have rule of the bureaucrat, or if the bureaucracy is in charge, and then what meaning does democracy actually have? If the people cannot vote and have their will be decided by their elected representatives in the form of the president and the Senate and the House, then we don't live in a democracy, we live in a bureaucracy. So it's incredibly important that we close that feedback loop, we fix that feedback loop, and that the public's elected representatives, the president, the House, and the Senate, decide what happens, as opposed to a large unelected bureaucracy. This is not to say that there are good people who are in the federal bureaucracy, but you can't have an autonomous federal bureaucracy. You have to have one that is responsive to the people. That's the whole point of a democracy. And if you looked at this, if you looked at the founders today and said, what do you think of the way things have turned out? Well, we have this unelected, fourth unconstitutional branch of government, which is the bureaucracy, which has, in a lot of ways, currently more power than any elected representative. And this is not something that people want, and it does not match the will of the people. So it's just something we've got to fix. And then we've also got to address the deficit. So we've got a $2 trillion deficit, and if we don't do something about this deficit, the country's going bankrupt. I mean, it's really astounding that the interest payments alone on the national debt exceed the Defense Department budget, which is shocking because we spend a lot of money on defense. But if that just keeps going, we're essentially going to bankrupt the country. So what I really would say is, like, it's not optional for us to reduce the federal expenses. It's essential. It's essential for America to remain solvent as a country, and it's essential for America to have the resources necessary to provide things to its citizens and not simply be servicing vast amounts of debt.
And also, could you mention some of the things that your team has found, some of the crazy numbers, including the woman that walked away with about $30 million,
right,
et cetera?
Well, we do find it sort of rather odd that there are quite a few people in the bureaucracy who have ostensibly a salary of a few $100,000, but somehow manage to accrue tens of millions of dollars in net worth while they are in that position, which is, what happened to USAID. We're just curious as to where it came from. Maybe they're very good at investing, in which case we should take their investment advice, perhaps. But there seems to be mysteriously they get wealthy. We don't know why. Where does it come from? And I think the reality is that they're getting wealthy at the taxpayer expense. That's the honest truth of it. So, we're looking at, if you look at, say Treasury, for example, basic controls that should be in place, that are in place in any company, such as making sure that any given payment has a payment categorization code, that there is a comment field that describes the payment, and that if a payment is on the do not pay list, that you don't actually pay it. None of those things are true currently. So the reason that departments can't pass audits is because the payments don't have a categorization code. It's like just a massive number of blank checks just flying out the building. So you can't reconcile blank checks. You've got comment fields that are also blank, so you don't know why the payment was made. And then we've got this truly absurd, a do not pay list, which can take up to a year for an organization to get on a do not pay list. And this, we're talking about terrorist organizations, we're talking about known fraudsters, known aspects of waste, known things that do not match any congressional appropriation, can take up to a year to get on the list, and even once on the list is not used. It's mind-blowing. So what we're talking about here, we're really just talking about adding common sense controls that should be present, that haven't been present. So you say, like, well, how could such a thing arise? That seems crazy. When you understand that really everything is geared towards complaint minimization, so then you understand the motivations. So if people receive money, they don't complain, obviously. But if people don't receive money, they do complain. And the fraudsters complain the loudest and the fastest. So then when you understand that, then it makes sense. Oh, that's why everything just, they approve all the payments at Treasury. Because if you approve all the payments, you don't get complaints. But now we're saying that, no, actually, we are going to complain. If money is spent badly, if your taxpayer dollars are not spent in a sensible and frugal manner, then that's not okay. Your tax dollars need to be spent wisely on things that matter to the people. I mean, these things, like it's just common sense. It's not draconian or radical. I think it's really just saying, let's look at each of the expenditures and say, is this actually in the best interest of the people? And if it is, it's approved. If it's not, we should think about it. So, there's crazy things like just cursory examination of Social Security, and we've got people in there that are 150 years old. Now, do you know anyone who's 150? I don't. Okay. They should be on the Guinness Book of World Records. They're missing out. So, that's a case where, I think they're probably dead. It's my guess. Or they should be very famous, one of the two. And then there's a whole bunch of Social Security payments where there's no identifying information. Well, why is there no identifying information? Obviously, we want to make sure that people who deserve to receive Social Security do receive it, and that they receive it quickly and accurately. I'll tell you another crazy thing. So, one of the things is we are trying to sort of right-size the federal bureaucracy, just make sure that this. Obviously, there need to be a lot of people working for the federal government, but not as many as currently. So we're saying, let's, if people can retire, with full benefits and everything, that would be good. They can retire, get their retirement payments, everything. And then we were told, this is actually, I think, a great anecdote, because we're told the most number of people that could retire possibly in a month is 10,000. We're like, well, why is that? Well, because all the retirement paperwork is manual on paper. It's manually calculated, then written down on a piece of paper. Then it goes down a mine. And what do you mean a mine? There's a limestone mine where we store all the retirement paperwork. And you look at a picture of this mine. We'll post some pictures afterwards. And this mine looks like something out of the 50s because it was started in 1955. So it looks like it's like a time warp. And then the speed, then the limiting factor is the speed at which the mine shaft elevator can move determines how many people can retire from the federal government. And the elevator breaks down sometimes, and then nobody can retire. Doesn't that sound crazy? There's 1,000 people that work on this. So I think if we take those people and say, you know what, instead of working in a mine shaft and carrying manila envelopes to boxes in a mine shaft, you could do practically anything else, and you would add to the goods and services of the United States in a more useful way. So anyway, so I think that's an example. At a high level, if you say how do we increase prosperity, is we get people to shift from roles that are low to negative productivity to high productivity roles. And so increase the total output of goods and services, which means that there's a higher standard of living available for everyone. That's the actual goal. Everyone's very quiet.
Your detractors, Mr. Musk.
I have to what?
Including a lot of Democrats.
I have detractors?
You do, sir.
I don't believe it.
Say that you're orchestrating a hostile takeover of government and doing it in a non-transparent way. What's your response to that criticism?
Well, first of all, you couldn't ask for a stronger mandate from the public. The public voted. We have a majority of the public voting for President Trump. We won the House. We won the Senate. The people voted for major government reform. There should be no doubt about that. That was on the campaign. The president spoke about that at every rally. The people voted for major government reform, and that's what the people are going to get. They're going to get what they voted for. And a lot of times, people that don't get what they voted for, but in this presidency, they are going to get what they voted for. And that's what democracy is all about.
Mr. Musk, the White House says that you will identify and excuse yourself from any conflicts of interest that you may have. Does that mean that you are in effect policing yourself? What are the checks and balances that are in place to ensure that there is accountability and transparency?
Well, we actually are trying to be as transparent as possible. In fact, our actions, we post our actions to the DOGE handle on X and to the DOGE website. So all of our actions are maximally transparent. In fact, I don't think there's been, I don't know of a case that where an organization has been more transparent than the DOGE organization. So, you know, and the kind of things we're doing are, I think, very, very simple and basic. They're not, you know, what I mentioned, for example, about Treasury, just making sure that payments that go out, taxpayer money that goes out, is categorized correctly, that the payment is explained, that organizations on the do not pay list, which takes a lot to get there, that actually are not paid, which currently they are paid. These are not individual judgment decisions. These are about simply having sensible checks and balances in the system itself to ensure that taxpayer money is spent well. So it's got nothing to do with, like, say, a contract with some company of mine at all.
But if there is a conflict of interest when it comes to you yourself, for instance, you've received billions of dollars in federal contracts, when it comes to the Pentagon, for instance, which the president I know has directed you to look into.
Yeah.
Are you policing yourself in that? Is there any sort of accountability check and balance in place that would provide any transparency for the American people?
Well, all of our actions are fully public. So if you see anything, you say, like, wait a second, hey, you know, that seems like maybe that's, you know, that there's a conflict there. I sort of like people are going to be shy about saying that. They'll say it immediately.
Including you yourself?
Yes. But transparency is what builds trust, not simply somebody asserting trust. So not somebody saying they're trustworthy, but transparency, so you can see everything that's going on. And then you can see, am I doing something that benefits one of my companies or not? It's totally obvious.
And if we thought that, we would not let him do that segment or look in that area. If we thought there was a lack of transparency or a conflict of interest. And we watch that also. He's a big businessman. He's a successful guy. That's why we want him doing this. We don't want an unsuccessful guy doing this. Now, one thing also that Elon hasn't really mentioned are the groups of people that are getting some of these payments. They're ridiculous. And we're talking about billions of dollars that we've already found. We found fraud and abuse. I would say those two words as opposed to the third word that I usually use, but in this case, fraud and abuse. It's abusive because most of these things are virtually made up, or certainly money shouldn't be sent to them. And you know what I'm talking about. It's crazy. So, but we're talking about tens of billions of dollars that we've already found. And now a judge who's an activist judge wants to try and stop us from doing this. Why? Why would they want to do that? I campaigned on this. I campaigned on the fact that I said government is corrupt. And it is very corrupt. It's very, very, it's also foolish. As an example, a man has a contract for 3 months and the contract ends, but they keep paying him for the next 20 years, you know, because nobody ends a contract. You got a lot of that. You have a contract that's a 3-month contract. Now, normally, if you're in a small, in all fairness, it's the size of this thing is so big.
Yeah.
But if you have a contract and you're in a regular business, you end the contract in 3 months. You know it's a consultant. Here's a contract for 3 months, but it goes on for 20 years. And the guy doesn't say that he got money for 20 years. You know, they don't say it. They just keep getting checks month after month, and you have various things like that, and even much worse than that, actually, much worse. And I guess you call that incompetence, maybe.
Yeah.
It could be corruption. It could be deals made on both sides, you know, where the guy gets the money, he kicks. I think there's a lot of kickback here. I see a lot of kickback here.
There's a lot of kickbacks.
A tremendous kickback, because nobody could be so stupid to give out some of these contracts,
Yes.
so he has to get a kickback. So that's what I got elected for, that and borders and military and a lot of things, but this is a big part of it. And I hope that the court system is going to allow us to do what we have to do. We got elected to among other things, find all of this fraud, abuse, all of this horrible stuff going on. And we've already found billions of dollars, not like a little bit, billions, many billions of dollars. And when you get down to it, it's going to be probably close to $1 trillion. It could be
Yes.
close to $1 trillion that we're going to find. That will have quite an impact on the budget.
Yes.
And you'll go to a judge where they handpick a judge, and he has certain leanings. I'm not knocking anybody for that, but he has certain leanings, and he wants us to stop looking. How do you stop looking? I mean, we've already found it. We have a case in New York where a hotel has paid $59 million, $59 million because it's housing migrants, illegal migrants, all
Yeah.
illegal, I believe.
And they were being paid twice the normal room rate at
Yeah.
100% occupancy.
Unbelievable.
So it's a racket.
Yeah.
Mr. Moss, can I ask a question? You
Well,
said on-
if I may sort of just going for the President's comments, at a high level, you say, well, what are the two ingredients that are really necessary in order to cut the budget deficit in half from $2 trillion to $1 trillion? And it's really two things: competence and caring. And if you add competence and caring, you'll cut the budget deficit in half. And I fully expect to be scrutinized and get a daily proctology exam, basically. Might as well just camp out there. So it's not like I think I can get away with something. I'll be scrutinized nonstop. But with support of the President, we can cut the budget deficit in half from $2 trillion to $1, and then with deregulation, because there's a lot of sort of regulations that don't ultimately serve the public good. We need to free the builders of America to build. And if we do that, that means I think we can get the economic growth to be maybe 3-4%, maybe 5%. And that means if you can get $1 trillion of economic growth and you cut the budget deficit by $1 trillion, between now and next year, there is no inflation. There's no inflation in 26. And if the government is not borrowing as much, it means that interest costs decline. So everyone's the mortgage, their car payment, their credit card bills, anything, their student debt, the monthly payments drop. That's a fantastic scenario for the average American. I mean, imagine they're going down the grocery aisle and the prices from one year to the next are the same, and their mortgage, all their debt payments dropped. How great is that for the average American?
We had
That's
no
already-
idea. We had no idea we were going to find this much, and it's open. It's not like complicated.
It's not that
simple stuff.
complicated.
It's
just a lot of work. Yeah.
You can't believe it. A lot of work. A lot of smart people involved. Very, very smart people. But you're talking about anywhere maybe 500 billion. It's crazy the kind of numbers you're
It is really
talking
crazy.
about. Normally when you're looking at something, you'll find you're looking for 1 out of 100. Here, you're almost reversing it. You look for one that's good,
Yeah.
and you can look at the title, and you say, why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? And the public gets it. The public gets it. You've seen the polls. The public is saying, why are we paying all this money? This for years, this has gone on.
Mr. Moss,
President
you
Trump,
said on-
the Senator-
Yeah, go ahead. Wait, go ahead.
Senator Rand Paul today said that DOGE cuts will ultimately need a vote in Congress. Do you agree with that? Is that the plan?
I really don't know. I know this. We're finding tremendous fraud and tremendous abuse. If I need a vote of Congress to find fraud and abuse, it's fine with me. I think we'll get the vote, although there'll be some people that wouldn't vote. And how could a judge want to hold us back from finding all of this fraud and finding all of this incompetence? Why would that happen? Why would even Congress want to do that? Now, Congress, if we do need a vote, I think we'd get a very easy vote because we have a track record now. We've already found billions of dollars of abuse, incompetence, and corruption. A lot of corruption.
If a judge does block one of your policies, part of your agenda, will you abide by that ruling? Will you
Well,
comply
I
with that
always
order?
abide by the courts, and then I'll have to appeal it. But then what he's done is he's slowed down the momentum. And it gives crooked people more time to cover up the books. If a person's crooked and they get caught, other people see that, and all of a sudden it becomes harder later on. So,
Yeah.
the answer is I always abide by the courts, always abide by them, and will appeal. But appeals take a long time, and I would
Yeah.
hope that a judge, if you go into a judge and you show him, here's a corrupt situation, we have a check to be sent, but we found it to be corrupt. Do you want us to send this
Yeah,
corrupt check to a
exactly.
person, or do you want us not to give it and give it back to the taxpayer? I would hope a judge would say, don't send it, give it back to the taxpayer.
Yeah, if I can add to that, what we're finding is that a bunch of the fraud is not even going to Americans. So I think we can all agree that if there's going to be fraud, it should at least go to Americans. But a bunch of the fraud rings that are operating in the United States and taking advantage of the federal government, especially in the entitlements programs, are actually foreign fraud rings. They're operating in other countries and actually exporting money to other countries. We should stop that.
Mr. Musk, you
And
said,
this is big numbers. Talk about $100 to $200 billion a year.
Sure.
Serious money.
Mr. Musk, you said on X
Yeah.
that an example of the fraud that you have cited was $50 million of condoms was sent to Gaza. But after fact check this, apparently Gaza in Mozambique, and the program was to protect them against HIV. So can you correct the statements? It wasn't sent to Hamas actually. It was sent to Mozambique, which makes sense why condoms was sent there.
Yeah.
And how can we make sure that all the statements that you said were correct, so we can trust what you say?
Well, first of all, some of the things that I say will be incorrect and should be corrected. So nobody's going to bat 1,000. I mean, we will make mistakes, but we'll act quickly to correct any mistakes. I'm not sure we should be sending $50 million worth of condoms to anywhere, frankly. I'm not sure that's something Americans would be really excited about. And that is really an enormous number of condoms, if you think about it. But if it went to Mozambique instead of Gaza, I'm like, okay, that's not as bad, but still, why are we doing that?
Mr. Musk, can you talk a little bit about how closely you're working with agency heads as you're directing these cuts? Do they have how much input do agency heads have when you're making these decisions?
Yeah, we work closely with the agency heads, there are sort of checks in place. So it's not just us just going in and doing things willy-nilly. It's in partnership with the agency heads, and I check frequently with the president to make sure that this is what the president wants to have happen. So we talk almost every day, and I double check things to make sure, is this something, Mr. President, you want us to do this? Then we'll do it.
USAID has been one of your main targets. Are you concerned at all that some of the cuts or that shutting that agency altogether may lead to diseases or other bigger problems starting in other countries that then come to the United States?
Yeah, so that's an interesting example. So that's something where we work closely with the State Department and Secretary Rubio. And we have, for example, turned on funding for Ebola prevention and for HIV prevention.
You left that, you said?
Yes, correct. And we are moving fast, so we will make mistakes, but we'll also fix the mistakes very quickly.
Do you see it as a worthy cause, USAID?
I think that there's some worthy things, but overall, if you say what is the bang for the buck, I would say it was not very good. And there was far too much of what USAID was doing was influencing elections in ways that I think were dubious and do not stand the light of day.
I just have to follow up to the Pentagon contracts. If you have received billions of dollars in contracts from the Pentagon, and the president's directing you to look into the Department of Defense, is that a conflict of interest?
Are going to do at the president's request.
Does that present a conflict of interest for you?
No, because you'd have to look at the individual contract and say, first of all, I'm not the one, filing the contract. It's people at SpaceX or something who will be fighting for the contract. And I'd like to say, if you see any contract where where it was awarded to SpaceX and it wasn't by far the best value for money for the taxpayer, let me know, because every one of them was.
The president said the other day that you might look at treasuries. Could you explain that a little bit? What kind of fraud, and that question goes to both of you, what kind of fraud are you expecting to see or do you see right now in U.S. treasuries?
Yeah, I think you mean the Treasury Department as opposed to Treasury bills, or.
You also referenced treasuries on Air Force
Yeah,
One the other night.
go ahead.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, really the first order of business is to make sure we're actually collecting. Sorry for this. I thought my son might enjoy this, but he's sticking his fingers in my ears and stuff. So it's a bit hard to hear sometimes. Hey, stop that. The stuff we're doing with Treasury Department is so basic that you can't believe it doesn't exist already. So for example, like I mentioned, just making sure that when a payment goes out, it has to have a payment categorization code. It's like, what type of payment is this? you can't just leave the field blank. Currently, many payments, the field is left blank. And you have to describe what's the payment for, some basic rationalization. That also is left blank. So this is why, the Pentagon, when's the last time the Pentagon passed an audit? I mean, a decade ago, maybe? Ever? Really? And we want to, just in order to actually pass audits, you have to have financial information that allows you to trace the payments. And once in a while, the Treasury has to pause payments if it thinks the payment is going to a fraudulent organization. If a company or an organization is on a do not pay list, we should not pay it. I'm sure you would agree. Like, if it's quite hard to get on that payment, the do not pay list, it means that this is someone that is just, it's like dead people, terrorists, known fraudsters, that kind of thing. We should not pay them. But currently we do, which is crazy. We should stop that.
Many, many transactions. And by the way, hundreds, thousands of transactions like that. You know, we have a big team. And for the sake of the country, I hope that the person that's in charge and the other people that report to me that are in charge are allowed to do the right thing, namely make sure everything's honest, legitimate, and competent. But we're looking at just, when you look at USAID, that's one. We're going to look at the military, we're going to look at education. They're much bigger areas. But the USAID is really corrupt. I'll tell you, it's corrupt. It's incompetent, and it's really corrupt. And I can't imagine a judge saying, well, it may be corrupt, but you don't have the right. You got elected to look over the country and to, as we say, make America great again, but you don't have the right to go and look and see whether or not things are right that they're paying or that things are honest that they're paying. And nobody can even believe this. Other people, law professors, they've been saying, how can you take that person's right away? You're supposed to be running the country, but we're not allowed to look at who they're paying it to and what they're paying. We have massive amounts of fraud that we caught. I think we probably caught way over a lot of billions of dollars already in, 2 weeks?
Yes.
And it's going to go to numbers that you're not going to believe. And much, as I said, much is incompetence and much is dishonesty. We have to catch it. And the only way we're going to catch it is to look for it. And if a judge is going to say you're not allowed to look for it, that's pretty sad for our country. I don't understand how it could even work.
On the buyout program, can you personally guarantee that
Which one?
The buyout program, the operative federal workers, can you personally guarantee that the workers who opt in to resign now will be paid through September?
Well, they'll get their money, but they're getting a good deal. They're getting a big buyout. And what we're trying to do is reduce government. We have too many people. We have office space. It's occupied by 4%. Nobody's showing up to work because they were told not to. And then Biden gave them a 5-year pass, some of them, 48,000 of them, gave them a 5-year pass, that for 5 years you don't have to show up to work. And let me tell you, this is largely, much of this stuff is because of Biden. It's his fault. He allowed this country, what he did on our border. What he did on our border is almost not as bad as what he did with all of these contracts that have come out. It's a very sad day when we look at it. I can't even believe it. But many contracts just extend, and they just keep extending, and there was nobody there to correct it. And that cannot be, I can't imagine that could be held up by the court. Any court that would say that the president or his representatives, like Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of State, whatever, doesn't have the right to go over their books and make sure everything's honest. I mean, how can you have a country? You can't have anything that way. You can't have a business that way. You can't have a country that way. Hey, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
All right, guys. Guys, let's go. Come on, guys.
He's coming back tonight.
Guys, come on.
Mark Fogel will be at the White House tonight at about 10 o'clock. If you want to come over, you can say hello to him.
Did the U.S. give anything in return?
Not much. No, they were very nice. We were treated very nicely by Russia, actually. I hope that's the beginning of a relationship where we can end that war and millions of people can stop being killed. They've lost millions of people. They lost, in terms of soldiers, probably 1.5 million soldiers in a short period of time. We got to stop that war. And I'm interested primarily from the standpoint of death. We're losing all those soldiers. And they're not American soldiers, they're Ukrainian and Russian soldiers. but you're probably talking about $1.5 million. I think we got to bring that one to an end. Okay? Thank you.
All right,
Thank
guys.
you.
Now, let me say a word about public broadcasting. There was a time, Mr. President, I don't know if you remember it, but I do, when families in the evening would gather around a single radio. They just had one radio in the house, or a single TV, often a black and white TV, to hear the evening news. And for many Americans, particularly in rural areas, public broadcasting was the only option for them. That was true in some parts of our country. They could only access public broadcasting to get up-to-date news and information. Those days are gone. Things are much different today. Today, Americans get their news everywhere. Everywhere. Websites, podcasts, social media posts, radio shows, cable TV, streaming, broadcast television. The world has changed, particularly the world of mass communications. I think back 10, 15 years ago in my state, Louisiana, newspapers were king, followed closely by local television stations. Newspapers led with the news and everybody else followed in terms of what was newsworthy. Boy, those days changed. I polled recently in Louisiana to find out where my people in Louisiana get their news. 4% of the people in Louisiana get their news from the newspapers. That's just a fact. Number one, as you might imagine, is the internet. The world has changed. This trend is not partisan. It's not a Republican thing or it's not a Democratic thing. President Trump and former Vice President Harris, they both did popular podcasts in their election. And many of my fellow senators and many of my friends in the House running for election also did podcasts as well. A lot of the pundits have even called the 2024 race the podcast election. No American today, not one that I know of, is dependent on a single source of news to remain informed. And that's a good thing. It might have made sense many, many, many years ago for the federal government to subsidize and fund public broadcasting. 50 years ago, that might have made sense. But the ability of the American people today to access whatever news they would like to hear from whatever form of media they choose is no longer limited. It's virtually unlimited just only by the imagination. So here's my question, Mr. President, and something that we need to think about. If all this is true, if media has changed, and it's accessible to everyone, why is the United States Congress still spending $500 million a year, not $500,000 a year, $500 million a year to fund the Corporation for Public Broadcasting? It makes no sense. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting, we call it CPB, Mr. President, as you know. It's a nonprofit entity that takes taxpayer money that it gets from Congress and distributes it to local TV and radio stations. Now, you might not have heard of CPB, but you probably heard of two of its, I won't call them subsidiaries, but two of its closely affiliated entities, I'll call them. The Public Broadcasting Station, we call it PBS, and National Public Radio, NPR. Now, here's how it works. Every year, Congress gives the Corporation for Public Broadcasting $500 million. And the Corporation for Public Broadcasting takes that money and gives it to a lot of the local TV and radio stations. And a lot of those local TV and radio stations are encouraged to, and indeed do, by programming, if they're radio stations, from NPR, or if they're television stations, they buy a pre-recorded, pre-developed programming from the PBS. Congress established this system and established the Corporation for Public Broadcasting in 1967, over 50 years ago. At the time, Congress tasked CPB, and I'm not saying it didn't make sense then, it probably did make sense then, but Congress tasked the CPB with a mission to ensure that the American people had, and I want to quote here, to be precise, had, quote, universal access to non-commercial, high-quality content and telecommunication services. And indeed, CPB boasts that on its website that 99% of Americans have access to public media. Hell, they ought to. We're spending $500 million of your taxpayer money to make sure they do. That's not the question. Because Americans have access to all different types of and forms of media today. They don't need to get their news from public broadcasting. This isn't the old days when people had one television set or one radio and lived in a rural area and that was the only source of news. The world has changed. The issue today is whether the American people need taxpayer-funded public broadcasting to access high-quality content anymore. And they don't. And we all know they don't. You don't have to be Walter Cronkite's cousin to figure that out. Everybody's got a cell phone. Everybody's on the internet. Everybody's heard of podcasts. Everybody's heard of cable. Many people have streaming services. Today, 97% of Americans have access to the internet. Why do we need public broadcasting? That's more than double the number of Americans who could access the internet two decades ago. Things have quickly changed. People now have a bottomless supply of news sources right at their fingertips whenever they need them. Why do we have to give $500 million a year to subsidize a certain small favored section of the media? Parents can also very easily find free educational programming if they want to. They don't have to go to public broadcasting. All they got to do is go to YouTube. All they got to do is go to other streaming services. The popular YouTube series Crash Course, for example, it has more than 16 million subscribers. PragerU is another educational content provider. It has 3.3 million subscribers. For comparison, PBS only has 1.4 million subscribers. You know what the difference is? You give them $500 million of your hard-earned money. That's the difference. Now, some may argue, well, we still need public broadcasting because it offers non-commercial programming. They argue it's really cool because you don't get interrupted by commercials. Well, the new chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, Mr. Brendan Carr, has just called that into question. He's called into question whether NPR and PBS are really non-commercial broadcasts. Mr. Carr has noted that NPR and PBS regularly run commercial advertisements during their shows and broadcasts in contravention of federal law. No advertising? All you got to do is turn on the stations. Give me a break. And in fact, the FCC has launched an investigation into NPR and PBS to determine whether they've been violating federal law. There seems to be no distinction between the advertiser-funded content on PBS or NPR and the content Americans can access for free anywhere else. But there is a key difference. I'm going to keep coming back to it. PBS and NPR receive a truckload a bucket load of cash from the American people. In total, Congress will send the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and indirectly NPR and PBS, $535 million in 2025. That's an increase of 20.2% since 2020. Has your income gone up 20.2% since 2020? I know your expenses have. By 2027, CPB wants Congress to send it nearly $600 million. For what? For what? PBS alone received roughly $130 million last year in taxpayer-funded grants from the federal government through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. That's 35% of its total budget. NPR similarly receives $96 million through taxpayer-funded grants from CPB. That's also roughly 32% of NPR's total budget. Why? Why? Why CPB? Why NPR? Why any of these alphabet soup entities? Why not the New York Times? Why not the Washington Post? Why not Fox News? Why these three particular entities? That's a question we have to ask. And we're not talking chump change here. We're giving them $500 million a year. NPR is one of the few, as far as I know, they're the only newsroom in the country that gets taxpayer funding. And you would think that after receiving nearly $100 million from NPR, I want to single out NPR for a second, you would think that after receiving nearly $100 million from taxpayers, that would motivate NPR to play it right down the middle, to only publish fair reporting. You would think that with the American taxpayer giving NPR $100 million every year like clockwork, you should be able to go to NPR and look at the news and say, I don't know what party these folks are in. I don't know whether they're liberals. I don't know whether they're conservatives. I don't know whether they're left of center or right of center. I just know that they fairly report the news. But that's not the case, Mr. President. That's not the case. I want to give you a few examples of stories that NPR has published using taxpayer money. I'll just read the headlines. First headline, NPR News Service. Michael Avenatti, quote, a profile of the media-savvy attorney. They love Michael Avenatti. You know where Michael Avenatti is today? He's in jail. You know why? He's a crook. But for a while, he was a media darling on NPR. Here's another headline from NPR. How racism became a marketing tool for country music. I kid you not. The American taxpayers are spending $500 million a year to pay a local station to buy content that says country music is racist. Here's another headline from NPR. Donald Trump's long embrace of Vladimir Putin. Remember the Russiagate? The Steele dossier? NPR was right in there promoting it. Couple more headlines that NPR is putting out there using your tax dollars. This headline, monuments and teams have changed names. Let me say it again. Monuments and teams presumably sports teams, have changed names as America reckons with racism. Birds are next. I don't know any birds that are racist. Here's another headline. Eating less beef is a climate solution. Eating less beef is a climate solution. I don't have anything against vegetarians. I'm a semi-vegetarian myself. I eat beef and cows eat grass. So that makes me a semi-vegetarian. But that's my choice. Not on NPR. Eating less beef is a climate solution. Here's why that's hard for some American men. Here's the final headline. I could go on the rest of the evening. How the Taliban adds to Afghanistan's woes when it comes to climate-fueled disasters. Boy, I can tell you that's on the mind of every person in Afghanistan today, is climate change. And the Taliban, I can guarantee you. I don't have a problem with these headlines. This is America. If you want to publish articles like this, which no person with a brain above a single-cell organism would call fair and balanced, if you're a news outlet and you want to publish this kind of stuff, that is your right as an American. We have freedom of the press. We have the First Amendment. You're not free in our country if you can't say what you think. You're not free in our country if you can't express yourself. I'm all for this, if that's what these outlets want to do. But I'm not for taking $500 million every single year and giving it to these stations to the exclusion of everybody else so they can do it. That's immoral. That's illegal as far as I'm concerned, or should be. Now, I'm sure that there's an audience in some campus coffee shop that wants to learn about racist birds or the different ways in which cheeseburgers and the Taliban are contributing to climate change. But most American taxpayers would probably prefer that Congress spend their money on something other than these controversial points of view that appeal to only a small segment of America's population while the rest of us foot the bill. Now, that's not just my opinion. A former editor at NPR, a gentleman by the name of Yuri Berliner. Mr. Berliner, he used to be an editor at NPR. He published a column last year. And in the column, he outlined the extreme bias at NPR. He detailed how NPR decided to censor the Hunter Biden laptop story. It wouldn't run stories about it. It said it wasn't real. Mr. Berliner, the former editor at NPR, said that NPR told its readers, and I'm quoting, quote, "We don't want to waste our time on stories that are not really stories. And we don't want to waste the listeners' and readers' time on stories that are just pure distractions." End quote. The Hunter Biden laptop is real. The FBI has it. It's there at the FBI headquarters, bigger than Dallas. Of course, we now know that the laptop was not just a distraction. Every bit of it was real. But NPR censored it using American taxpayer money. NPR also similarly covered the COVID-19 lab leak theory as though it was a conspiracy. That's how the news coverage reads, in my opinion. That if you believe that COVID-19 originated from a lab leak, you're a conspiracy theorist. I would point out that we're going to have to get some new conspiracy theories in America because all the old ones turned out to be true. The conspiracy theorists are up something like 37-0. But not if you read NPR. They say or said that the COVID-19 lab leak theory, you had to be some kind of conehead, some kind of meathead, some kind of whack job to believe in that stuff. Now the federal government, the CIA, the FBI, they've stated publicly that the pandemic likely originated from what? A lab leak. I can't make this stuff up. Now, other independent analysts have shown that NPR's content also leans left. Since 1970, the United States Congress has given NPR more than $14.5 billion. With all those taxpayer dollars, NPR bought a $201 million office space just up the road from the Capitol. It's swell office space, $200 million worth. NPR pays its hosts as much as $532,000 a year. It pays its chief diversity officer $320,000 a year. Pretty good work if you can get it. Not NPR money. Came from you. You paid those salaries. And despite all the spending, NPR's audience continues to decline because they're obsolete. Now, Congress does not send taxpayer money to the most popular podcast hosts in America. We don't. The anchors on Fox News, the anchors on CNN, the anchors on MSNBC, nor their stations, they don't get any taxpayer dollars. Nor do any of the journalists that ask me questions every day in the hallway of this building, unless they work for NPR or PBS or their affiliates of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Congress should not be picking winners and losers in the news media. But that's what we're doing. The United States of America has $36 trillion in debt. We can't afford anymore to blow $500 million for public broadcasting when Americans can find the same content, and in many cases better content, online for free. Now, if you want to support NPR and PBS or any other public media outlet, that is great. God bless you. This is America. You're free to do it. You are free to donate to those nonprofits as you see fit. Donate to them. But Congress should not compel taxpayers to fund them, to fund a service that the American people don't need, especially when the content, well, you can read what the content is, and maybe you agree with it. But a whole bunch of Americans don't. A whole bunch of Americans don't think that birds are racist. President Trump's Department of Government Efficiency is looking for fat to trim, Mr. President. As far as I'm concerned, this gravy train with biscuit wheels called the Corporation for Public Broadcasting is the perfect example of a project the American people no longer need and should not fund. Mr. President, I suggest the absence of a quorum unless Senator Peters would like me to yield the floor. I take that back, Mr. President. I've been given instructions to read this. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that notwithstanding Rule 22, oh, I love this. This is great. I ask unanimous consent that notwithstanding Rule 22, this makes me so happy, the confirmation vote with respect to the Gabbard nomination occur at 11 a.m. on Wednesday, February 12th. Further, I ask that the cloture motions filed on Thursday, February 6th, ripen following disposition of the Gabbard nomination. And finally, if cloture is invoked on the Kennedy nomination, that's Mr. Robert Kennedy, the post-cloture time count, let me try that again, the post-cloture time count as if invoked at 1 o'clock a.m., Wednesday, February 12th. Thank you, Jesus.
Is there an objection? Without objection, so ordered.